Sansa, he said. His head moved towards hers, but she had already moved further behind him. Reaching her arms around him to unfasten his breeches, they fell to his knees. Where had this courage come from? I've never been so bold. Stepping out of his boots and pants, he let her gently nudge him towards the bath. His shirt hung long, covering his cock. The water's still warm, she said kindly. It'll be good for your sore muscles, too. Sansa was too nervous to look at him. She was sure he must have felt her hand shake when she touched his waist. Get in, she told him. She saw him hesitate. I won't look if you don't want me to. You're just taking a bath, she tried to reassure him, and finally he gave in to the princess's orders. We can pretend this is nothing. As he slid down into the tub, Sansa helped pull his loose tunic over his head, her hands running up and down his strong back, stopping just above the curve of his bum. Every inch of him beautiful, even the knife wounds that crisscrossed his back, so many she couldn't count. How could he have survived such a brutal attack? Except he didn't survive. He was brought back. Sansa could feel her heart breaking for him, for everything he had suffered alone. We cannot be alone again. We are all each other has. Jon sat in the warm water, letting her run a rag over his arms while she knelt beside the tub. First, Sansa washed his wounded, calloused hands, then began working her way around his body, up his arms to his lean, strong shoulders, then around his neck. His body was lean and muscular, not so tall, though not small. In the dark and warm room, Sansa leaned in close to her king. Her lips barely touched his neck, just below his ears. You are the king in the north, she said. The people chose you because they believe in you. They need you. The north needs you. I need you. Oh, Sansa, he whispered. I have no rights to it. To the north. To you. She could hear the anguish in his voice. Jon, they say it'll be a long winter. You've told me what comes from the north with the cold. We know our enemies to the south, she said. What'll rights matter in these wars to come? We shouldn't, he said. You said it feels true, she responded. How does this feel? She began softly kissing his neck. He didn't stop her. She wanted to cover him in kisses, running the rag down his chest, her arms in the water, washing his stomach, hip bones, thighs. She moved the rag all over his body until finally she found his cock like a sword in her hands. She slowly began to move her long, slim fingers up and down. He leaned his head back, his eyes closed, his breath heavier and heavier, arms reaching up towards Sansa's face, his calloused hands getting tangled in her hair. Stand up, Sansa told him as her nerves fell away and her voice took on a commanding tone that she scarcely recognized. They both stood as Jon got out of the bath. Turning to face her, grabbing her arms, he kissed Sansa with such strength and sweetness. His hands went inside her open robe, moving to her breasts. Not meaning to, she backed away, just slightly. The thought of Ramsay flashed in her mind, of Ramsay hitting her violently, grabbing her naked breasts. Quickly, she didn't want Jon to see her discomfort. I can do this. Jon is kind and gentle and brave. She pretended she was catching her breath. You're so beautiful, she said, looking his body up and down. Even the scars are beautiful, sad and strong, like a song. So are you, he said as he reached for the robe. Gently, Sansa held his hand and guided him to the large bed covered in furs. Sit, Sansa told him, staring into his eyes. He smiled shyly. Okay. Picking up her towel, she helped dry his wet body before taking off her robe. She kneeled before him. You don't have to, he said. I want to, she responded. With that, Sansa started licking his hard cock, holding his balls. It wasn't long before the whole thing was in her mouth, and he fell back on the bed, moaning. When his seed spilled out, she licked some of it, letting the rest fall on her breast. He looked even more exhausted than after a battle, lying on the bed with his eyes closed. They both crawled under the thick furs and blankets, lying in his arms. Sansa felt him kiss the top of her head before sleep took him. She didn't remember how much longer she stayed awake. Eventually, her eyes closed, too tired even to dream. Was it a coolness in the room or the movement by the hearth that woke her? She wasn't sure. When she looked up, Jon was naked, looking out an open window into the moonlit night. He heard her moving. He turned and smiled and joked. "Hello, sleepyhead," he said. Adding wood to the fire and stoking the embers before coming back to bed, she looked nervously. "How long have we slept?" "Don't worry. No one is up. The castle is sound asleep and will be for at least a few more hours," he assured her, kissing her. "Thank you," he said. "I wanted to do that for you," Sansa said shyly. They began kissing, drinking each other again. She felt his hunger underneath the gentleness. It was hot, burning, drawing her in towards his flame. "Now I want to do something for you," he said as he pulled her body even closer. Suddenly she gasped and pulled away. He stopped, and she saw the confusion on his face. "What's wrong?" he started to say before a look of revelation appeared on his face. "I'm not like him," he told her, meaning Ramsay. "I know," Sansa said, flushed with embarrassment. She didn't want him to know how scared she was to let a man touch her, even though she wanted him to so very much. Be brave, bastard brave, like him. She felt him scanning her soft face, looking for her secrets, a question forming on his mouth. "Have you ever made love?" he asked. "What are you talking about? I'm not a maiden. You know that," Sansa said with annoyance in her voice. Was Jon making fun of her? What a stupid woman he must think she is. Maybe he wishes she was a maid. "I mean, has anyone ever laid with you because they loved you and you loved them?" he asked in all sincerity, holding her face. Turning away from him. "He wants to be kind to me, that's all. He could never understand the pain in my heart," she thought. "Sansa," he touched her chin. "Can I make love to you? I won't hurt you." Taking a deep breath. "Yes," she spoke so softly. She wanted him. She had wanted him for weeks. She wanted him at Castle Black. She wanted him as they traveled the north. She wanted him before the battle. She wanted him when she placed the crown on his head. Half-brother or cousin, it made no difference. She still wanted him. Putting all thoughts out of her mind, she leaned in to kiss him. "If you want me to stop, just say," he said, moving to kiss her breasts. "Can I do this?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "And this?" Moving down to her soft stomach. "Yes," she said. "And this?" he asked again as his mouth went to a place no man's lips had ever touched. With a loud sigh, Sansa said yes. Her lips and his tongue found their way around her lady parts, soft and wet. Suddenly a fire started to rise up inside of Sansa from between her legs, up into her stomach, then down into her legs. They began to shake. Soon her whole self was shaking, moans coming out of her mouth. All thoughts were gone. She was in this moment fully. Then the explosion happened and she cried out, her breath heavy. Her mind slowly returned to her. "Gods, he's as hungry as a wolf and sets me on fire like a dragon." Jon started to kiss her stomach again and move up to look into her eyes. "Shh, you wake the whole castle." If she could have spoken, she would have told him she didn't care. She didn't care who heard. Instead, she kissed him, grabbing his hair. "Can I do this?" he asked slowly, moving his body in between her legs. She could feel his cock hard, strong against her thighs. Still, her words didn't come. She could only nod and keep kissing him. He put his cock inside her, moving slowly back and forth, looking into her eyes. They looked at each other, then he kissed her neck, still moving back and forth, slowly, slowing down and speeding up, sometimes moving his hips in circles, pressing deep inside of her. Her hands on his back, her nails digging into his muscles, holding him as tight as she could. She could have stayed like that forever, just Jon and Sansa. A moment that seemed as if it lasted forever. He began moving faster, and Sansa started to feel the fire rise from her womanhood to her stomach. As he let his seed go, her body exploded for a second time, and they both cried out. "Finish," he collapsed on top of her. She let her fingers trace the muscles and scars on his back. Everything was so quiet. Where moments before it had been all moans and cries of passion, they fell asleep next to each other, tangled together between the furs. When she woke again, the fire had gone down. The room was cool despite the heat from the hot springs. Still dark, though, Sansa could tell morning was coming. This thought brought a sadness to her heart. Jon looked so beautiful asleep she could barely bring herself to nudge him awake. She knew he hardly slept most nights. The rest is good for him, and besides, she didn't want him to leave. She wanted to stay like this with him, hiding from the world. "Jon, wake up," she whispered. He stirred again. She said, "Wake up." Sleepy-eyed, he looked at her, then smiled, remembering where he was. "You must wake up. If anyone finds you here, no one can know. Not yet," she worried. "You're already kicking me out of your bed," he joked. Smiling, "I don't want to, but you must go," she insisted. He nodded. Getting up and finding his clothes on the floor, she caught the last glimpses of his naked body before he put on his pants, tunic, boots. When Jon was dressed, he turned and leaned towards her, kissing so deeply all the memories of just a few hours earlier rushed back into Sansa's mind. "I'm going, but I'll be back," he said, smiling. She smiled back and watched him unlock the door, checking the hallway before stepping out of the room. Sansa softly closed the door behind him. While Winterfell and all its responsibilities awaited her, the princess in the north could only think of the secrets she now held in her heart.